Hello, my name is Steve Langford. I'm the author of the book, Following Jesus, Discipleship in the Gospel of Mark. Thank you for taking just a few minutes to allow me to tell you about the book. As you know, each of the four Gospels tells the story of the life and ministry, death and resurrection of Jesus. But each of the different Gospels has a unique message that it is attempting to communicate about Jesus and a unique audience to whom that message is addressed. In this book, I identify the unique message of the Gospel of Mark, and I identify how the Gospel writer communicated that unique message. The message is captured in a single story found in the middle of Mark's Gospel. It's the story of the healing of a blind man. Now, all four of the Gospels record a healing story of a blind man. But this particular story is different. In this story, the healing required a second touch. People brought the blind man to Jesus, asking Jesus to heal him. And so Jesus anointed his eyes and then asked, "Can you see anything?" And the blind man said, "I can see, but people look like trees walking around." And so Jesus touched his eyes a second time, after which he was able to see clearly. Now there's several unique factors about this story. The first, the most obvious, is that this story, this healing, required a second touch. It is the only healing miracle in any gospel that required a second touch. A second unique feature about this story is that it is found only in the Gospel of Mark. No other gospel writer records it. And a third interesting note is that this story that required a second touch is found in the middle of Mark's Gospel. It divides the Gospel in half. Surely, this story, which was unique to Mark's Gospel, had some special meaning to its author. As we look at that story more closely, we can identify three different stages in the man's experience. To begin with, he was blind. He could not see. Then, after Jesus anointed his eyes, he was able to see, but not clearly, the second stage. Finally, the third stage came after Jesus touched his eyes the second time, and he was able to see clearly. This story of the man who was healed from his blindness is a metaphor the gospel writer used about the disciples' experience. The disciples are the blind man. In the first half of the gospel, the disciples are blind. That is, they did not recognize that Jesus was the Messiah, and they could not understand the things he taught. When Jesus spoke to the storm on the Sea of Galilee, their response was, "Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him?" In chapter 4, where Jesus taught in parables, they came to him and said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand anything?" Then, after Jesus walked on the water, after the feeding of the 5,000, the biblical writer says, "But their hearts were hardened, and they did not understand about the loaves." In chapter 7, Jesus was teaching, seeking to shift their focus away from external behavior and conformity to the law and tradition and expectations, to focus upon what's in the heart. And they asked him about it, and he said, "Do you not understand?" The first half of the gospel ends with 9 questions piled on top of each other. Are your hearts hardened? Do you not understand? Do you have eyes but cannot see? Do you have ears but cannot hear? Do you not understand? You see, in the first half of the gospel, the disciples were blind. They did not recognize that Jesus was the Messiah. They could not understand what he taught. In fact, in the first half of the gospel, the only people who recognized that Jesus was the Messiah were people who were possessed by demons. Then immediately after this story, Jesus took the disciples on a retreat. He took them north of the Sea of Galilee into the mountain region of Caesarea Philippi. And there, you know the story, there he said, "Who are people saying that I am?" And then he asked the question, "But who do you say I am?" It was Peter, you know, that answered him. And you remember Peter's answer, "You're the Christ. You're the Messiah." And Jesus affirmed Peter's answer. You see, now the disciples can see. Now they understand that Jesus is the Messiah. The problem was they could not see clearly. They still could not understand the things he taught. In the second half of the book, the disciples see, but not clearly. Chapters 8, 9, and 10 of the gospel are the heart of Jesus' teachings about who he was as the Messiah, but more importantly, about the nature of discipleship. In response to Peter's answer, "You're the Messiah," Jesus said, "Yes, now let me tell you what that means. We're on our way to Jerusalem, and when I get there, I will be arrested, put on trial, condemned to death. They will crucify me. I will die. And then I'll be raised again." And Peter's response to that was, "No, that's not going to happen to you." 3 different times, once in chapter 8, once in chapter 9, and once in chapter 10, the gospel writer records that Jesus tried to prepare the disciples for what he would experience in Jerusalem, but each time the disciples struggled to hear what he was saying, much less embrace it. So every time they resisted what he had to say, he then taught them what it meant to be his followers. "If anyone wants to come after me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, follow me." The heart of discipleship, captivated in one single teaching. In chapter 9, he said, "And that produces a servant spirit within us." And then in chapter 10, he said, that servant spirit is expressed in how we use power. The heart of the Gospel of Mark is teaching about discipleship. The unique message of the Gospel is a message about discipleship. It is the disciples' story told in the midst of Jesus' story. It is the story of how they moved from being blind to seeing but not seeing clearly, to eventually seeing clearly. The seeing clearly came with the second touch. And the second touch is found in 2 things. It is found in their failure to be faithful to Jesus when he was arrested. Peter denied him. All of them abandoned him. Judas betrayed him. And that failure was an integral part, an important part of their learning to see clearly. But the key to their seeing clearly was the resurrection. The unique message in the Gospel of Mark, as I present in this book, is a message about discipleship. What is discipleship and what does it look like? Discipleship is a journey from being blind to seeing but not clearly to seeing clearly. Discipleship is a journey in which we move from thinking the way the world trained us to think and live to learning to think and live as Jesus taught. Discipleship is a journey of walking in relationship with Jesus, learning the things of God and the ways of God that Jesus taught. And we will resist many of those things that Jesus taught, just as the disciples did in the last half of the book. But eventually, with the second touch, we will learn not only to hear what he said, but to accept what he said and taught and embrace it so that it shapes how we think and how we live. I trust you'll pick up a copy of the book. I trust you'll read it. I trust you'll use it with your small group. And I trust you'll find it helpful in understanding the Gospel of Mark, but more importantly, in understanding what it means to be a follower of Jesus, a disciple today. For you see, the Gospel of Mark is just not the story of the disciples' journey. It's the story of your journey and my journey as the followers of Jesus today. You can pick up a copy by going on my website, pastorstevelangford.com, or by going on the website of the publisher, trafford.com, trafford.com. Look in the bookstore under my name. I would enjoy hearing from you as you read, and especially if you have questions, feel free to communicate with me through my website, pastorstevelangford.com. So until I hear from you, I pray that you, as well as all of us who are the followers of Jesus today, will experience the second touch that will enable us to see clearly, so that we not only hear what Jesus taught, but we embrace it and allow it to shape how we think and how we live. The peace of Christ be with you.